Welcome back to another episode of our Backyard Boys Informal Outdoors podcast. I'm your host, Josh. Jordan, co-host down there. We are on episode 2, and today we have a special guest, Mr. Nick Nation. He is the creator of the Habitat Hook. If you don't know of that, we'll talk more about that later on. But no further ado, I'm gonna introduce you to Mr. Nick Nation over here. Nick, before we get started on talking crazy habitat or anything like that, why don't you start us off by telling us a little bit about yourself, how you got started in the outdoor world, a little bit about what you do, if you do anything other than the Habitat Hook or anything like that, and about your properties and stuff. So
Sure. So I'm started up Nations Creations back. It's been quite a few years now. I think I've been building the hooks for about almost 10 years now. I started up the business side in about 2014. Just to try, I kept the name kind of broad, not tied to one thing because of other ideas I was hoping to come up with along the way and bring to market. But the Habitat Hook stuck. Started doing that in about 2010, 2011. Made up my first version. Tried it out with a few buddies and it worked out really well. And the entrepreneur side of me just kind of turned it into a little side business along the way. I'm a quality and manufacturing engineer by trade, and parents have a couple Ace Hardware stores, so I always had the business mindset, and I've done pretty good with it. Keep bringing it to where it is now. I sell them or send them all over the country, a couple here and there to Canada. I've been getting quite a bit more requests to send them up to Canada, so I'd like to tap into that market here soon. The exporting is a little difficult though, due to the size. But
you muted yourself, Nick.
It's getting close.
Okay.
So, I got into the habitat portion, and the hinge cutting back in about the same time I started with the hooks, 2009, 2010. And along the way, it went from the hinge cutting into, the habitat plan management. And I learned it from everyone else, and then as well as my own experiences. I've learned a lot of do's and don'ts along the way through my own failures. So it's gotten to the point now where I've gotten pretty good at it, I feel. I started doing some of my buddies' management plans and putting those together, and then it evolved into a few more requests here and there. And I don't really advertise it too much because it's a large percentage of the time to work a full-time job and then do the hooks on the side, especially during the busy season, and family, all my other hobbies that I have a boatload of, and keep it up with all. But I do, I would like to step away from the full-time job and slowly get into the management aspect as well. There's quite a few people doing it, so you need to kind of offer something a little different to stand out. So working on that. I started doing I do a few a year now, just drawing up some management plans on. I just used Excel, and I came up with my own template where I got icons and stuff that I drop in basically and modify it to fit. And it turns out looking out pretty good.
Cool. Hey, before we start getting into like the habitat part and all that stuff, why don't you explain? I mean, now I've used your product, and I know you have multiple hooks, and I know you have for different things. Why don't you explain? I'm going to share the screen. Why don't you explain a little bit about your hook? So if anybody doesn't know what the Habitat Hook is, I'm going to share the screen here so that y'all can kind of see his hooks here. Right there is part of the hook, the top part of the hook, and then the bottom. So Nick, why don't you explain a little bit about your hooks here?
So I guess one of the first things is hinge cutting. A lot of people still aren't familiar with hinge cutting and what it is that are entering the habitat their habitat goals, or so hinge cutting is where you're cutting roughly 2/3 of the way through the tree, 3/4 of the way through with a saw, and then you use the hook to push or pull it over.
Okay.
Then the tree continues to stay alive as long as the cambium layer of the tree stays intact. That's what the hook's for. It gives you that leverage so you don't have to cut as far through the tree.
Okay.
I usually prefer to push rather than pull. It's just easier for me. And it gets the tree the tree goes away from you, so you're not working in the limbs, and you don't risk getting it bent up, and it's caught up in the tree. But so that's what the hook does. I have a few different models where there's a couple different fixed length models that don't extend. They're 7 foot long or just about 7 foot long. And then I have the extendable models that extend out to about 13 foot for the steel version. And then I have an aluminum version I've been selling for a few years now that is doing really well. It's pretty nice. It's a nice tool. But that one extends out to about 12 foot. And that extra leverage there, you got 12 foot, 13 foot plus your height. It's amazing how much tree you can move with that kind of leverage. So
Yeah.
I think there's 7 different models total now when you look at them.
And
I got a question.
What one would you say would be like the one if somebody was just starting off and was like, you know what, I want to get into maybe doing some tree cutting or hinge cutting, and I want to get a habitat hook. What one would you say would be probably the best one for somebody to get?
Most everyone, I would say 90% of the ones I sell are one of the extendable models. So you have the base extendable, which is it extends 13 foot, but it's I call the standard strength or standard duty material. It's a hot rolled steel, whereas I have the same thing, but in what I call a heavy duty version, which it's a cold drawn steel, which the mechanical properties are about twice as strong. So I have that as like a $25 upcharge right now, where it jumps you into the heavy duty model. It's about a pound heavier, but you can't tell a big difference from the standard duty to the heavy duty. But everyone that asked, I always try to point them in the direction of the extended version, just because it gives you that ability to have that extension where you can have that extra leverage on a little bit larger trees. The fixed length ones are fine for doing those small trees that are right around that 4-inch, 5-inch base diameter.
Okay. Jordan, you had a question?
Yeah, as long as you're keeping that layer in the trees, how long do you usually get the hinge cuts to last?
I've got some right now that are still living that I originally did almost 10 years ago.
Wow.
And a lot of the times you'll end up hinging the hinges. So I've got trees this year I want to get out, and they're about 4 to 5 years old now, and those hinge cuts are reaching the 4-inch diameter, where they're growing. The height of them is it's starting to suppress the undergrowth again. So I'll take those and hinge those over again and bring down the browse level and allow that sunlight to hit the floor again, and you'll start regenerating more trees and more forbs.
Cool.
Awesome.
But if the hinge stays together, and is the 2 big things you got to have is you got to have the hinge stay together, which allows the cambium layer to pass nutrients for the tree, and it has to have sunlight. You can't hinge a tree in the middle of the woods and not have it, get sunlight, because you've taken it from its height, and then brought it down to under the canopy, and that's where they die. A lot of people are they have failures and don't have success because they'll hinge a small area inside of the woods, and after about 2 years, 3 years, those hinges will die because they didn't have enough sunlight to keep growing.
Okay.
Interesting.
So since we're on the topic of hinge cutting, I know it can be a controversial topic, but I've used it many times. I enjoy it. Let's talk about the benefits. What are the benefits of hinge cutting?
Well, the number one is you have immediate cover. So you've taken this vertical tree, you've brought it down to the level of a deer, you're under 6 foot, and you've created horizontal cover for them. And there's all different designs or methods you can use based on the direction you tip the tree, and how high you cut it is going to dictate what it's being used for. So you have bedding, screening, travel corridors. Those are the three main ones where, if for bedding, you're going to cut, usually tip them outward. You don't want the deer to feel like they're in a cattle chute. So usually you're going to cut away from the direction of travel, perpendicular. So when you're in a bedding area, usually you're tipping trees outward. You'll tip some overhead for overhead cover. Travel corridors, they're going to run perpendicular to the line of travel. Screening is going to be opposite, where you don't want them to be able to travel through, or you don't want them to be able to see, so you're going to be parallel to your travel. So there's just a few different things there.
You said height. So what's if I'm creating a bedding and I'm looking to push the trees outward, what would be a good height to start my cut?
It depends how big of a bedding area you're trying to make. If it's a fairly large one, you're around that 50, 75 foot mark, and you're working from the outer edge, I try to stagger them. So out on the very edge, I'll tip them so they're a little bit closer to that knee height. And then as you work towards the inside of the bed, I work my way up in height, so that way they can get underneath them and travel under and around them. One of the other things, when you're doing these hinge cuts, the other, I said that the main first thing is you're given that immediate horizontal cover. Well, the second is you're going to provide that browse, not just from the trees that you've brought down that have that browse on the buds and whatnot. You're going to have the regenerative growth from the ground, the sunlight's getting down, and then those trees that you hinge cut are going to start growing sucker shoots, and the deer are going to browse on those. So one of the controversial things is when people do those really high hinge cuts, they're at that shoulder height or head height, which I've done lots of, but I do that because I want the deer to be able to navigate under them easily, as well as in areas that I do. I want to be able to walk under them as well. But you're still getting that tree at the top, to ground level, and you're allowing a bunch of new sunlight to the ground to regenerate that. So it's a toss up. I mean, it can go both ways.
Now going above the head is probably not the greatest thing to do, correct?
No,
safety thing.
Yeah, it's not safe. That's the main issue there, is running a chainsaw above your head it's not safe at all. So definitely can't recommend that.
Yeah.
Most of my stuff I'm doing at about chest height when I'm doing my bedding areas and stuff, because then the deer can still get under it. You have to compensate for, usually the first year, the once the foliage comes on and you get snow loads on there, on average I see about 8 inches to almost a foot of height drop. All your hinges will settle.
Yeah, I noticed that on a couple of mine, and I had to go back in this year and kind of clean up underneath them a little bit. So, staying on the topic of hinge cutting, before we move on a little bit here, what are some trees that you're like, hey, these trees should be hinge cut? I mean, these are great trees to hinge cut. I mean, is there specific trees that are better than others?
Yep. There's usually what loggers would call your weed trees or your soft mass trees. So box elder, hinge is good, and it grows really, really good after. I've had great luck with cottonwood. Those have very vigorous growth after. Cherry trees are hit and miss. Sometimes they'll hinge pretty good, but they do grow really good after. White oak, walnut also hinges. A lot of people don't want to hinge walnuts, but and the truth of it is they do hinge really well to provide cover. The deer don't eat them, so it's more of just a cover tree. Some of the ones that don't hinge cut well at all that I try to stay away from, or I'll just do a conventional cut. Red oak, hickory, soft maple. Soft maple don't hinge very well at all unless they're smaller. You can work with them pretty well, but they have great stump growth, and the deer absolutely love the new browse and sucker shoots from those. It's amazing. Even when you clear out the canopy, we did a small area here back about a month ago on a southern facing slope that we took out about 20 good sized maples. We just did a conventional cuts. We didn't try to hinge them at all. But we opened up that southern sky, and all these small little maple shoots are popping up now. We got grass growing in there, whereas before it was completely dead. But the deer are in there nipping off all those fresh little maples.
That's cool. That's perfect. That's awesome. Yeah, because I just actually on the new property there, I just hinge cut a bunch of maple. I hinge cut some small maples, but then took a couple maples out, and my forest is loaded with maples. And I'm thinking that I'm gonna just be cutting those conventionally just to get that, because they're soft maples. They're not anything. Yep. Now you said, and I know some people cringe about this. You said white oaks.
Yep.
You said white oaks. I mean, most people are thinking oaks. You don't touch oak trees. I mean, why would, what the heck?
Red oaks, I don't bat an eye at a red oak. They're not, they do provide acorns, but they're not really, at least in my area, a highly preferred food source for deer. Oaks, on the other hand, they only provide, food for the deer for a very, very short time. Whereas if you remove the canopy and you have, this large tree is now gone, so now it's all the sunlight's able to hit the ground. Well, now we're going to have hundreds of oak trees, cherry trees, ash, all these other trees that the deer are going to love to browse on, and which are going to grow up and provide far more tonnage of food than what that one tree drops for a couple weeks out of the year. Yep. So that's, I mean, and it's not a blanket statement to cut all your white oaks. It's just, it depends on your property. If you only have a couple large white oaks that are producing, then leave them. But if you have hundreds of white oaks that are in various stages of life, that leave some of the big ones, cut out some of the smaller ones, open areas and pockets. It all goes into the management plan to get what you really want out of that. And I think that's where a lot of people get caught up. They take a one statement and say, "Oh, no, you can't do that. That's terrible." Well, it depends.
Yeah, sounds like there's a lot of different ways you can go with this and cutting different style trees and whatnot.
Yep.
Now, if let's say somebody doesn't want to hinge cut a bedding area, is there other ways to create a bedding area other than hinge cutting?
It depends if you got trees there. I mean, if you have an open field, say you have an open field, you can do it by planting warm season grasses. You can do selective spraying where you spray the grasses, like a lot of these old farm fields that are fallow and they got all the natural forbs in there. Well, if you can go in there, you can scratch up the dirt, till up the dirt in areas. As the grasses start coming up, you can spray those with clethodim or a grass-specific herbicide and let all the natural forbs grow up. I've created food plots like that, just natural food plots. You get rid of the grasses so they don't smother out everything, gives everything else a chance to grow. But if those weeds get to that 6 and 7 foot tall mark, them deer will naturally bed in there. Okay. Cave and rock switchgrass works really good for that. Working in open areas like that. In the woods, if you don't want to hinge, you got to remove the canopy in the woods in order to create bedding or give them structure of some sort.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought on that too. I was kind of thinking along that, and I'm like, I want to. So along the lines of an open field, okay, we'll kind of switch gears a little bit and just start talking a little bit more about different habitat. We talked about hinge cutting, how that creates the instant browse and how that creates the forbs growing up, and all that stuff, and then the regular conventional cuts and everything as well. Let's kind of switch gears and still stay on the topic of the management of wildlife management and stuff, and say we have an open field. And somebody wants to go out and they want to create this habitat. What are some of the best things? I know you said that spraying some of the grasses, but I mean, do we do we go out and plant food plots right away? Do we add screening? What do we do?
It's tough. So one of the number one things with setting up a property is always going to be your access. You know, you have to visualize how you're going to get to and from your stands with bumping deer as little as possible. You don't want to walk through open areas. You don't want to walk through your open food plots. Depending on the size of the parcel, you know, if you got a smaller parcel, you really don't want to hunt on the edges of your food plots either. You try to tuck away and, you know, hunt them when they're coming to and from food. It's a, you know, pretty simple concept. But the open field aspect, if you're starting with the open field, the blank slate, get yourself a, you know, a sheet of paper and some crayons or markers, and you can just kind of make X's where you want to put your stands, and you just kind of build the habitat around it. Switchgrass, you know, it obviously takes time to grow trees, many, many years. So if you only have a open field to work with, you know, having that switchgrass, cave and rock switchgrass grows really fast. I mean, 3 years to maturity, it's getting to that 6 to 8 foot mark. Within about 3 to 4 years. You got miscanthus grass, which that takes 3 years to mature, but it takes a lot of that to create, you know, your pockets and stuff. The best thing is just tilling up the soil, literally just breaking up that soil and bringing those new seeds to the surface that are in the seed bank and letting things go and just see what you end up with. You can create all kinds of stuff with that, creating pockets. You know, you get briars and stuff. They'll grow up the first couple of years. You'll end up with all kinds of soft mass trees that will grow. And, you know, over about a 5-year period, you know, you'll start to see things transform and be able to, you know, start to fill in the blank spots.
So not going out and mowing it. I mean, I see a lot of people.
No. No, you don't. If you already have an open field with stuff growing, you know, you can do that selective spraying and pick certain spots that you want to grow. You don't want the giant food plot in there, because a giant food plot is usually considered a destination source by the deer, and they're going to hit that towards last light. If you try hunting it, usually you bump the deer out of there, and they learn very, very quickly. You get lucky. To get consistency, a lot of people will get lucky, you know, timing here and there, hunting those edges of those larger food plots. You know, this is talking about our state of Michigan here, which is heavily pressured.
Yes,
I mean,
very.
The deer grow up looking in the trees, and, you know, they're ready to be ambushed at any time, anywhere. So they're a little bit different species here, a little more difficult to hunt than the unpressured areas. So hunting those large plots and stuff that some people want to put out in the middle of their fields is difficult. I don't recommend it.
Okay, so you would probably recommend more like micro plots, you know, that kind of break into another, you know, kind of transition into another micro plot, or
Yep. That's what I do a lot of. I do a lot of my stuff is, because usually what I'm working on are smaller parcels.
Yep.
None of the larger ones. You know, you were talking 30, 50 acres and less. So my home property here that I shot my deer off of last year, I'm only on 10 acres, and I have this very heavy hunting pressure all around me. No one does scent control, nothing like that. So, I mean, they get very smart very quickly. If I don't have it done by gun season, it's not going to happen. So I target the pre-rut, and I have micro plots that draw the does from my property. I have bedding locations on my property that, you know, draw the bucks. So as that pre-rut and the rut starts kicking in, those bucks are bouncing around my property in a circular pattern. I've watched them from stands and on my cameras. They run a circular pattern, chasing after does and seeking out the bedding areas around my house. Usually it's when I'm at work, but I got lucky last year.
Now you say a circular pattern. Did you design your property so that those deer moved in that circular pattern?
Yep, because the house is located right smack in the center of the 10 acres. when I first moved in, I had a bunch of ash trees out back that I knew were going to be dying. I could see from, it's a 10-acre square. I could see from one side all the way to the other through what's now one of the thicker areas. And the first thing I did in the very first year is I took out 60 ash trees in a small little 2-acre area that were either dead or on their way out. So I took all those out. I cut a couple cherry trees and a couple box elder. And I would say the first 3 to 4 years, it was really, really thick. It actually got too thick. So now I cut out some of my hinge cuts that had fallen down because of the ash trees. They just didn't live. But I cleared out some of those blockades that would prevent deer travel. I sprayed trails. I cut trails so the deer could go through it fairly easily. Now it's to the point over the last about 3 years now, it's grown up enough where the trees are getting tall enough. All the new trees are suppressing some of that undergrowth, and it's getting just to the point where I would call porous. So the deer can move through the whole property fairly easily, but I have designated trails put in that they follow just because it's the path of least resistance for them. When I see the bucks always, they so follow small areas, basically where I got my scrape location set up. They'll come out into the main area there, they'll hit a couple scrapes, and then they just disappear back into some goofy trail. There's not even a trail, they just usually disappear, like trying to ambush those does.
So they're not
Yeah,
they're not traveling those path that you created, or are they?
the does do. The bucks like to pop in and out. They'll follow the trails past one of my stand locations, because what I've done is I've set up the stands to have scrapes, and only scrapes at the stand locations.
Okay.
So when the bucks do come through, they're gonna focus on hitting those scrapes right by those stands. The does almost exclusively follow all the travel corridors, all the paths I've cut in. And I watch them from one stand. They'll come in behind and one off the field edge, and they'll follow it all the way around to, usually about halfway through the property, and then they'll jump into a destination field towards dusk.
That kind of makes me think a little bit, because I started cutting trails and stuff. So when you're hunting those trails, you're looking for like a little bunny trail or something that those bucks are probably going to be on, right? That probably on the downwind side of that trail.
Yep, I set up my stands so almost all my stands are accessed from the center of my property, which is kind of opposite from a lot of other parcels, because a lot of the other parcels you want to hunt or access from the outside edge. So you're going to use your outside perimeter edges and hunt in. Well, mine's different because my house is in the middle, so I have to hunt from the inside out. So I use my yard, and I have around the perimeter of my yard, I can slip in from the edge through some hinge cuts and then climb right up into a stand without them seeing me. The doe groups, they're only 50, 60 yards away a lot of the time when I climb up into the stand, and I'll see them get up, and they'll start meandering through.
Cool.
Yeah, that makes sense. So like you always have those windows. You're like, oh, he's coming through right there. That's the perfect window. Yep. And you have your does that are coming through there, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, like a ghost, the buck is sneaking in through some other little spot just to check things out.
Yep. I use my the last few years I started using my trail cameras. Now I got the date down pretty good, but before I was paying a lot of attention to my trail cameras, and there's all of a sudden I'd start picking up deer towards the pre-rut, good sized bucks that I was like, oh, that's new. And I'd get them on daytime during the daytime for about 5 days, 5 days to a week, and then poof, they're gone. So I've got that window figured out. It's when my does are coming into the estrus, and I kind of got a pretty good idea of when to check the cameras. I got it. Cell cameras have made a difference now. It's definitely not foolproof, but it just helps. And I can almost hook up some of my cameras with Wi-Fi, but not to that point yet.
Right at your house there, you certainly probably could.
Yeah, it's close, but you obviously can't do that with your larger properties. But usually, about the end of September, early October, I'll have the bucks that are in the area. They'll start coming through at night, checking out those scrapes, and they'll start checking for does and see what's in the area. And usually around that time, I get a really good idea of what bucks I have in the area for the year, the target. And the one I shot last year, it was September 29th was the first time I got a picture of them. And it comes from a creek bottom not too far. A lot of the bucks will come from, but they move over during the night because they got to cross some pretty big ag fields. And they're about half to 3/4 of a mile away. And, once I start seeing them, I get excited, and I don't hunt all the time. I pick a few good days towards the end of October there, and hope that I see them on stand.
Yeah. That's kind of Jordan and I I've had a buck, and I've got a small parcel that I hunt also at my parents, and Jordan and I have been watching this same buck, and he's gonna be 4.5 this year, and watching the trail cam pics. He's there. He comes in late August, all the way through September into October, and then boof, he's gone, and I don't see him again until after rut. And I'm like, man, where is this buck going? And I know they have a home range, but it's just like, man, where is this buck going? And I don't know if it's because I don't have the cover for him, I don't have the forage for him, or what, but I can't figure this buck out.
He's showing up on like the exact same days, almost same time, at least within the hour over the last 2 years. It's pretty crazy.
Yep, they say that if you look back in your trail cameras pictures that you got, a lot of the times will come back right around the same exact day, year after year within that range. We had a similar opportunity last year at a buck we had been chasing for 4 years. We got first pictures of him that we know of as a 2-year-old, and we decided at 3 years old that we should probably start trying to shoot him. He was, a good-sized deer, but he had a goofy rack on the one side. It wasn't until he hit 5 years old that his left side that was weak and kind of goofy turned into a full symmetrical 8-point. And then at 6 years old, he gained just a little bit more, but he was topped out. And we were on the way back from a duck hunting trip when his neighbor ended up shooting. It ended up being, I think, 150 or 149 as an 8-point.
Wow.
It was an giant. And all these years of pictures, and year after year, we tried and tried and tried. We seen him on the hoof. I like 2 or 3 times the year prior, and he was just a ghost, man. He'd be passing on on the one side of the property, and we're 200 yards away hunting on the other because of the wind. And we'd never pressure the property. We'd try to hunt it smart, but he was just, I don't know, had that sixth sense or something.
Smart, man. So I mean, is there anything a hunter or a land manager or anybody could do? Like, so I got this buck that he disappears every year. I mean, is there a way I can keep him on the property? Is that what he's going to do?
That's probably what he's going to do. He's going to follow the same routine year after year. He's got a nice little honey hole spot that he's comfortable in. And then the does come into estrus in one spot, and then he moves over to another spot because he knows they're there. I've had a hard time keeping bucks on the property. There's only a couple people that I know of that I've personally met that year after year they're able to hold deer on their property, and they're right around the 75 plus acre size property.
Yeah.
But
okay.
I mean, it's just for a small. I see deer at night. I mean, I'm a coyote hunter. I do a lot of coyote hunting at nighttime now with thermal and night vision, and around my house, a lot of the bucks that are running around, through my infrared when I'm looking for coyotes. I've seen deer that are a mile away, mile and a half away at night, and they make it back and forth in no time at all. I mean, it's no big deal for them to travel a mile. So trying to keep deer on a, small property, that's tough. They're going to go. The does not so much. The does will stick around. They don't wander very far. I mean, I see the does on this 20-acre parcel around me between my property and the neighbors day after day all year long. But the bucks, they move.
What
Yeah.
about? I mean, can a property hold too many does at a time? Like if I'm putting out summer food and those does are coming in constantly, is that a bad thing?
Yeah. Yep. We another property that we hunt. You can have a doe factory. We had struggled because there was I think it was 13 or 15 acres of alfalfa, and we would see 30, 35 deer a night, not a single horn, night after night. It didn't matter. It was terrible. I mean, yeah, we seen deer, but we would never see any bucks. And trying to hunt it was a nightmare because you're walking along the edge of the alfalfa field, you're busting deer out at night, you bust them out in the morning. It was so hard to hunt. Well, this is the third year now. We turned all that into switch. So we've got rid of their summer food source. We don't see near the number of deer, which is good because I think that all those does push those bucks off into a second, third, fourth layer of habitat somewhere. Because the neighbors are shooting the bucks, the big bucks, but we're not. Okay. So we last year we didn't get. There's two good sized bucks shot. We had them on our trail cameras. We had many other bucks on trail cameras, but we didn't have the numbers of does that we'd see on stand like we did before. So we think that a lot of those does will push those bucks off, off to the next layer or so.
Go ahead, Jordan.
Now with that, like, a lot of people, they don't have their own property that they can manage and do things with, and you have that high volume of does. I mean, would you recommend, as the years go on, taking out those older does in early season?
Yep. We shoot a couple years in a row. We shot as many as we possibly could, and they rebounded fairly quick. But yeah. You got to remove some does. You can't not shoot your does unless you have a very, very, very few. But usually, when you start to do your surveys of how many deer you got around, you really need to make sure you remove some of them.
Are you shooting them in the early season or late season?
Usually we shoot ours in the late season, and it doesn't have anything to do with breeding. We do it because we don't want to be shooting and tracking deer in the early part of the season and pushing deer around. So we wait till the late firearm or muzzleloader season, and we just start, taking them out.
Yeah, I'm thinking on my 30 here. That's kind of what I know I'm going to have a lot of does there. I could tell right now, and I don't want to be pushing into my sanctuaries and stuff that I have set aside. So, okay.
I guess that's a good point though. I took a doe early last year, but after running cameras for a long time, I was like, man, I had plenty of opportunity in the late season to probably do that as well. So,
yep.
So
I mean,
go ahead.
I've shot them in the early season. I won't shoot them past mid-October, but the first 2 weeks of October, I don't have any problem shooting a couple with the bow. But I'm not hunting near the sanctuary areas or near the other areas. I'm trying to stay away from them, closer to the fronts of the property where it's easier to get in and out for getting a deer out. You just got to make sure that shot's perfect.
Yep.
No. Staying with the doe factory and the small parcels and everything, are you planning summer food plots then, or are you just waiting strictly for fall?
Yep, waiting strictly for fall. We're putting in fall food plots. We usually try to stick to like chicory and alfalfa for perennial plots and travel corridors. We put in buck forage oats last year, which was phenomenal draw. We're going to put more of that in this year. That had a really, really, really good draw.
Okay.
And it fed the deer for all the way into the late season. But yeah, we don't put in any of the summer plots anymore. They can go eat wherever. There's plenty enough browse for them around. But we've got enough cover now the property parcels are broken up enough where multiple doe groups can, reside without pressuring the other doe groups.
Okay.
They're actually really territorial.
Yeah, I've noticed that too on mine. I got on the small parcel there that, I tried to break mine up enough, and matter of fact, I found a fawn today. It's about the same spot I found a couple fawns last year. So, the does continue to breed there or fawn there, but it's like,
Yep.
I don't know if they're pushing my bucks out of there or what, but I'm hoping that I can I'm not putting any summer plots in this year just because of that. Cause I'm thinking, well, if I can make rooms for my buck, maybe that'll be better. I don't know. So
you got a good number of scrapes. You have some good scrapes locations in there around your property there. Something for the deer to communicate, tie downs. That's what I like doing a lot of. Grab a branch, tie it down, use a earth stake in there, and spray the ground, make sure it's bare dirt by about September, and usually the deer will take to it pretty good.
So when you're tying those down, you're bringing them down to about chest high, shoulder high, what? About chest high?
Chest height.
Okay.
Chest height, shoulder height. Just you want it so that they can reach it without really having to struggle too much. They do stand up on their hind legs and get to them, but yeah, chest height works. And you also have to account for, if you do it in the summertime, you have to pull them down lower, because once those leaves drop, they will raise up quite a bit.
When do you start your licking branches and all that?
If we do any new ones, we like to have it so it's bare dirt by the 1st of September.
Okay.
So you can do it any time during the year. We have several that are used throughout the year on some of our little points and hard edges. They'll use them quite all through the year, but tie them down, and we spray with a ground herbicide, ground vegetation, and usually about early August, about mid-August, and then we come back just before September and rake them out with a garden rake, so they're bare dirt.
Are you putting any scents or anything in them?
Oh, nope. No scents. Deer usually just first couple deer use them, and they all use them.
Okay, and then I noticed. I've talked to you before. You use water holes. Where do you use those water holes at?
Kind of usually where you got a good amount of travel. I got one here at my place. We just put another one in last week at a buddy's place, and these are kind of like pinch points. We leave them in the woods where they're, they don't have a lot of sunlight hitting them, so they grow stuff. But we try to make them on your main travel areas.
Okay.
So deer coming back and forth, gives them a pause, holds them up for a couple minutes to grab a drink.
Now I've been saying this for years, but I'm starting to think differently now that I've started to learn a little bit more. I've always said, man, I got water on my property. I've got water. I got a swamp. I don't need a water hole. I mean, what's that? I mean, do I need one? Do I not need one? Should I put one farther out where I'm going to hunt?
I don't understand it. I really don't. I know they don't seem to prefer to drink from a cold flowing stream. They would rather drink from stagnant water. I don't know what it is with a water hole. You put a puddle there and they just would prefer to drink out of it. So I don't know if it's temperature related or what, but I started selling some of these Earth Blinds water holes last year, and the feedback I've got from guys is, they can't keep them full. Some of them, the deer hit them so much, especially in the summer months. But these are properties that have water nearby, So I don't know what the draw is or why, but they just seem to prefer it.
Yeah, I've started to kind of start thinking about, I just thought of, do you put your licking branches? Because I'm using. Do you use vines at all for licking branches or licking?
Yeah, on a few spots we do actually, and they love them. They just absolutely love those. We'll clip them off and wrap them around or tie them up to another branch and let them hang down, and they absolutely love those vines hanging down. They will rub on or use them as a licking branch on every one.
Perfect. Are you putting
The
your
water hole?
Oh, go ahead.
Yep, I have a water holes here at my place. I got them close to my scrape locations just because they're next to a stand location. We did the same thing on the other one, but we have almost all our stands have some type of travel corridor or scrape line running past them that we've created.
Okay.
The goal there is, you got you want the deer to focus the most on that stand location itself. So you want to bring them as much traffic as possible past those stand locations, water holes, scrapes, travel corridors that have been planted with a perennial or annual, stuff like that.
Okay. Jordan, you got anything more on this topic at all before we kind of switch gears, or?
No, I was checked out those water holes, and those are pretty cool. And I was kind of thinking along the same lines as Josh. Is an area that I hunt. It's got a fairly big swamp, pond, whatever you want to call it. So I wasn't thinking, I probably don't need that. But listening to you talk about it, I mean, it all makes sense. Trying to bring them into your stand area and make a travel area that is attractive to them.
Yeah, those earth blind holes are pretty neat. They're pretty lightweight and carry them into fairly remote areas, but they're fiberglass and they have a gel coat on the bottom. The surface area of them is large, but they're still shallow, so you don't have to worry about critters or anything getting in there. It's easy for the deer to get down and drink too, because it's not like one of them deeper 55-gallon stock tanks or 100-gallon stock tanks. And then they have a textured surface, so that way any critters that do get in there or whatever, they can crawl their way out easily. So they're pretty neat.
Cool. Switching gears a little bit, we've been talking about like you owning property, people that can manage your property. What if you're hunting? I know Jordan hunts on a lease, or not. He hunts on kind of a lease, but it's not really. What if you're hunting on a lease and you can't hinge cut? You can't plant a food plot. What are things somebody could do to manage that property and give them a better chance at shooting a good buck?
Yep. So you're pretty much going to be stuck with creating those scrapes, those tie downs. If it's any type of field or field edges that you can work with, planting some type of perennial or annual food source along those travel corridors, basically creating some type of travel or pathway for the deer past your stand locations that those deer will follow. Sometimes food plots will help, little small micro food plots tucked in and around. Depends on the area. If it's all wooded, you're kind of limited because you can't just go cut a bunch of trees down. So you're stuck to hunting natural features. I mean, there's just really not a lot you can do with habitat manipulation if you can't, cut down trees, or if you don't have a field to work with or anything. You got to, like with a field or field edges, you can at least cut the grass or cut the weeds and plant something in place of it, which is actually really huge, especially if you have a large field that was left to grow, or it doesn't have anything ag in it. You can bush hog some trails through, snake them through, and the deer will follow those every time.
Okay. Now, topography. Let's talk a little bit about that. I know I was struggling with that word. Let's talk a little bit about that. I hear a lot of people talk about that, and when I'm looking at a property, what am I looking for? If I'm looking at this elevation change? Why do I want to really focus on that?
I guess it depends what it is. I don't like those high plateaus areas just because you're usually silhouetted a lot and you're able to be seen from all different areas, 360 degrees of you accessing those areas.
Okay.
I'll use some hillsides usually for access. So I'll sneak around the edges if I can. Creek bottoms are great to be able to sneak through. Um, the deer seem to prefer the lower areas. So if you're going to have, be hunting an area that has those lower creek bottom areas or just where a couple, like a saddle or something like that, almost majority of the time you can look at a topo map and, stay away from the high points, but the deer will be going through those lower cuts that cut through your higher elevation changes.
Okay. Interesting. So
Topo stuff is difficult because you got to have some type of vegetation there, whether it's trees or weeds, something growing to be able to access through it.
Okay, Jordan, anything more on leasing, since you're the one that kind of leases, or not really lease, but hunts property that you really can't do much to?
No, I just taking in it's a good point. I haven't done too much with the scrapes and pulling down the licking branches, so I know I'll probably try to work on that a little bit more this year and see what I can attract and through the pathways. And the area I do hunt, it does have a little bit of some valleys and dip downs by the swamp, so I might try to use that more to my advantage, like you're saying.
Go in there and see what you already have for deer traffic, trails, runways, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And start working off of those. You can start creating your own trails. Even use a backpack sprayer with a herbicide. You can spray along, create your trails, and once you create that, the deer will start using it, and then along that trail, by your route them past your stand locations, and then start doing those licking branches. And if you haven't used too many of them, you'll be shocked at how much those are used, especially basswoods. For whatever reason, they really like basswoods.
Okay. Yeah, that's a whole new thing for me. And last year was the first time hunting this specific property, so a lot of it was really just research and sitting in the stand on the field edges a lot to see where the deer are moving in and out of the property.
Yep, that helps.
Before we wrap it up, now let's we're gonna kind of circle back around. Somebody buys a parcel, they have a parcel, or they've already had it, and it's starting to get that park effect feel. You got the high canopy. Hold on. Oh no.
He's lagging, I think.
There
Josh,
you
can
go.
you hear us?
I'm back.
All right, you're good.
I got this high canopy, and I just listened to this podcast. I've been researching other stuff. What should I do? What's the first thing I should do? Should I go gun hole, start cutting trees down? Should I call a consultant like yourself? What should I do?
You don't want to go in and just start cutting trees without a plan. The first thing you want to do is you want to figure out how you're going to hunt it. Number one rule. It helps to be able to hunt it at least the first year if it's a brand new property. Hunt it and get an idea of what the current deer traffic is like, where the deer are coming and going from. That really helps get you set up for, before you start blazing trails. You can cut down, trees and start putting your food plots and putting your plan in place right then. But for me, I like knowing where the deer are already coming and going, so that way I can base some of the habitat features off of that. But definitely got to set up your stand locations and how you're going to plan to access your property. And then you'll know where to put your screens in. You'll know where you want to cut trees, where you want to put your bedding areas, because putting it on paper, will help get the planning phase done. You can base that off of your elevation changes, where your swamps or creeks or whatever is, open areas, all that comes into play when you're putting something together. But going out and hinge cutting a bunch of trees with no plan like I did initially starting off doesn't always, have the desired results.
Yeah,
that's one of the things that I learned along the way. I mean, we did a lot of hinge cutting. We went through, we made some nice brush piles and tornado zones that the rabbits liked, but the deer did not so much. So it can definitely be too thick. If you get in there and you feel like you're trapped and you can't just run like a deer, you get down at their level. If you feel like you can't run out easily, then it's got too many dead ends and you need to open some up.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. That's kind of, I know some people out there that, they'd like to do this, but they don't know where to start. And that's kind of interesting, how to start it, and I always hear the plan, always have a plan. And I like that. So yeah. So before we end here, Nick, why don't you tell people where they can find your stuff, man, where they can find the habitat hook, the watering holes, everything like that. How can they get a hold of you?
Yep. So for the hooks, I got them on my on my website there. It's nationscreations.net. Or you can go to habitathook.com. Both of them are the same website there. For the water holes, I don't have them on my website. I got a few left for this year. They'll have to reach out to me, look me up. I'm on the Facebook. They're either the Habitat Hook on Facebook, or you can just Nick Nation. You can send me a message on there and get you on.
Okay. Is there anything else that you would like to cover, Nick? Anything more that you want to tell anybody? Anything like that?
No, nothing I can think of. If anyone's looking to have a plan or something checked out, looked at, put together, they can get a hold of me.
Yeah, I've already talked to you many, and I'm definitely probably next year or something gonna kind of look into that, because I did a little bit of stuff this year, but I wanna expand a little bit. And I know a little bit, but I know you've done a little bit more than I have, and you've been you've done the classes of the stewardship and stuff like that.
Yep.
So I
Yep. You read the books, and then you do all the different habitat tours, and through everyone's different properties, and then you start doing it yourself. And sometime at some point it just clicked. And Jeff Sturgis has his three books that he put together really helped out when you read through those, and you're able to put all those together, and you finally get an idea of, okay, you're able to put all the puzzle pieces together, and then adapt on the fly as you go from property to property. So that's the hardest part, putting it all together.
So if somebody is gonna hire you, what are you doing that is gonna stand out from other people?
One of the big things I've been doing is the plan itself. So I've been doing some property walks, just the walk, but then I'm also doing the written plan, which a lot of people are doing, but I go into quite a bit detail. Some have told me I'm going into too much detail, but for right now, the number that I'm doing, I mean, I can do it right now.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see how long I can do it for, but I go all the way down to camera location and water hole locations, where you're putting the scrapes. When I break it down on the habitat plans, I'm going into quite of an extreme, very micro level. So, and again, they're focused on the smaller property parcels under 100 acres. So I can do that detail on these smaller properties, where to do it on the larger scale properties that are a couple 100 acres, it would just take too much time to be able to do. So kind of what I'm focused on, the guys that have the smaller properties around here.
And you have some of those photos on your Facebook, right, of the plans?
Yep. I posted a couple on there a few weeks back. Some I was doing, putting one together for a client over in the Hillsdale area.
Cool. Yeah. So if anybody wants to get a hold of Nick, just find him, look him up on Facebook, or the Habitat Hook. wealth of knowledge. I can tell you that. I've bounced some information off him every now and then. I'll send him a message, and he's very knowledgeable. And as you can tell, so before we go, Nick, I'm gonna end all my things on a question, and the question is, if you were able to today, I know we're in lockdown right now, but if you were able to today, and it was a season, what animal or what hunt would you be your dream hunt? What hunt would you go on?
Alaskan brown bear or grizzly.
Nice. Why is
Yep.
that? Just a challenge or?
Yeah, a challenge, and I don't know, the
Fear.
thought about hunting. It's like I don't know, it would be an extreme challenge, and it's actually intimidating. Like, I don't know if I'd actually ever even do it, just because I'd be scared. But at the same time, it would be the biggest rush to be hunting something that's 10 times bigger than me and that's gonna eat me. So
That would be
I don't know.
that would be quite interesting. I mean, I don't even know. I know Jordan's gone on an actual bear hunt, but I don't know, grizzly. So that'd be crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I got my first black bear this year. My Michigan black bear as my second attempt. Took me 14 years to be able to draw for the tags and do it all on my own. But walking out to that stand in the morning and out of it at night is very eerie when you know you're trying to draw bears in. So
Even the black bear, it is very eerie. I agree.
Crazy.
Yep, they're definitely afraid of you, but still, I mean, not so much hunting those the bears in Canada and Alaska.
All right. Well, Jordan, you got anything more?
No. Thanks, Nick, for coming on our podcast with us, man, sharing a bunch of information. So it was also nice to meet you for the first time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nick. And I want to thank everybody else for listening. And again, continue to subscribe and watch, and hopefully we continue to pull out some more information from different people. So thanks again, Nick, and we'll see you next time.